The alkali dust of the New Mexico Territory rose in choking clouds as Billy the Kid and his riders cut across the mesa toward the isolated cluster of shacks called Redemption Wells. It was the brutal summer of 1879, and the oppressive heat shimmered above the cracked earth like a disturbed spirit, making the vast, unforgiving landscape look like a furnace. William H. Bonney, barely 20 years old, but carrying the weight of 1,000 frontier battles in his steady eyes, pulled his bandana higher over his mouth. His Colt .45 felt like a familiar extension of his arm, its walnut grip warm from the sun. The only sound for miles was the rhythmic creak of worn leather and the dull thud of hooves on sun-baked clay. They arrived in town near sundown, the air thick with the smell of stale beer, wood smoke, and the uneasy silence that plagues places governed by fear. The light was failing, painting the cheap wooden facades of the buildings in hues of orange and bruised purple. Billy rode past the general store and the saloon, his keen gaze taking in the few locals who darted into doorways, recognizing the notorious gang instantly. The town was tight-lipped, the kind of scared silence a snake brings to a field of mice, and the only movement was the lazy swirl of dust devils down the main street. He dismounted by the local church, a simple adobe structure with a bell tower scarred by something heavier than weather. The building looked modest, but its presence spoke of a higher, forgotten law. "Doc, Charlie, take the horses to the shade behind the livery and stay put," Billy murmured, his voice low, cutting through the jingle of spurs. "Tom, come with me. Jose, find us high ground on that water tower and keep that Winchester warm. I don't like the smell of this quiet." Tom O'Folliard, loyal and built like a fence post, nodded, adjusting his worn Stetson. The church door stood ajar, revealing a dim interior, where the only illumination came from a single oil lamp placed near the altar. Inside, they found a young woman kneeling, her back straight but her shoulders shaking with silent grief. This was Maria Chavez, the local school teacher and close confidant of the deceased, Father Michael. The priest had been found 3 days prior, shot dead in his rectory, and the town hadn't dared to speak of it since. Billy moved with deceptive grace, resting his rifle against a wooden pew before crouching near her. The silence in the church was heavier than the desert heat. "Ma'am," he began gently, pulling his Stetson off his sweat-damp hair, revealing a youthful, almost boyish face that stood in stark contrast to his reputation. "My name's Billy. I ain't the law, but sometimes the law's got its eyes shut. Tell me about the padre. Who wanted him silenced?" Maria looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, but holding a desperate, fiery glint. She was vulnerable, dressed in simple calico, but with a spine of rawhide that surprised the outlaw. She recognized him instantly, the most wanted man in the territory, but saw in him not a demon, but a possible instrument of retribution. "They took his life, Mr. Bonney, shot him like a dog in his own study. No honor." "Who, ma'am?" Billy pressed, his tone firm. "Name the devil." "It was the sheriff, Mr. Bonney, Sheriff Gideon Hale, and his master, the cattle baron, Mr. Claiborne. Father Michael found ledgers proving they've been stealing land and water rights from the small homesteaders, the peonies. They're forging deeds, running illegal livestock across the border, and rigging every damn election in the county." Her voice was a choked whisper, each word a desperate plea for justice that the official channels had ignored. He was going to expose them all, right here, at Sunday Mass. He hid the proof. Billy's jaw tightened, the lines of his face hardening. He had seen this story before. The wealthy oppressing the weak, using a corrupt badge to sanction their cruelty. It was the same tyranny that had fueled his own war against the regulators. "A priest speaking the truth is a dangerous thing out here, ma'am, especially when that truth hits a man's pocket." He stood up, the lamplight catching the youthful intensity in his face. "Corrupt lawmen and greedy barons. Seems like the same old rotten tune from Fort Sumner to Lincoln. We stop it here." He reached out and touched the woman's shoulder with a calloused hand. His expression was serious, not boastful. "Father Michael won't have died for nothing." We'll find out who pulled the trigger and where the proof is hidden. You have my word. We'll bring a measure of justice to Redemption Wells, Billy the Kid style." Maria nodded slowly, a single tear tracking a path through the dust on her cheek, a pact sealed between the moral and the outlaw. As Billy and Tom stepped back into the street, the sun was a dying ember over the western ridge. Tom's hand went instinctively to his revolver. "Did you see that, Billy?" Tom whispered, pointing across the road. Two dark figures, silhouetted against the deepening dusk, were on the second story of the Red Feather Saloon, peering down at the church. A quick glint of light reflected off polished steel. "Seems like Hale's hired guns are watching the witnesses already. That light flickered just now. The clock's ticking on Maria, partner. We ride tonight to save the girl and catch a killer." Billy and his gang retreated 3 miles out of Redemption Wells, setting up a cold camp beneath the jagged, comforting shade of a rocky outcrop on a low mesa. The desert night was sharp and cool, a welcome contrast to the furnace of the day. The vast, starry sky of the frontier felt indifferent to the small, human drama about to unfold. The only sound was the crackle of a small, smokeless fire, carefully shielded, and the soft jingle of their gear as they tended to their horses. Billy spread a rough, hand-drawn map of the town on a saddle blanket, weighing down the corners with cartridges. An impromptu war council. His focus was absolute, drawing on an intellect sharper than any blade he carried. "Hale's men aren't watching Maria for fun," Billy stated, tapping the map with the barrel of his Winchester. "They're waiting for her to talk, or for their boss to decide she's a loose end. We hit first. We take out the gunmen before they even know we're here. Doc, what's the layout, and what do we know?" Doc Scurlock, the gang's cool-headed strategist, and the only one among them who'd read a book that wasn't a dime novel, adjusted his spectacles on his nose. "The sheriff's office is the strongest point right next to the bank, built of stone and reinforced. Claiborne's main ranch is 10 miles west, a stone fortress protected by 6 hired ranch hands. But the priest wasn't killed in a siege. He was silenced by a quick hand, Billy, someone they trusted to be quiet and efficient." "The shooter," Billy corrected, his voice a low growl. "Claiborne wouldn't trust Hale with the cleanup. He'd bring in professionals, outside talent, and those professionals don't like waiting. Jose Chavez, who could read the trails and the moods of the territory better than anyone, reported his initial findings from his scouting trip back into the town. 2 new faces in the Red Feather Saloon, playing poker and drinking rotgut, didn't speak much. Hard eyes. They've been seen talking only to the sheriff's deputy. Their names are rumored to be Silas and Jed. Silas is a brute, a big man, carries a sawed-off shotgun under his coat. Jed's jumpy, quick on the draw, carries a short-barreled Colt 45, a real shooter's gun." Billy pointed to a small, run-down livery stable on the western outskirts of the town, just past the last residential shack. "They're not sleeping in the jail. They're sleeping rough, probably at the livery. They want a fast exit if the deal goes south or if the marshal shows up. That means they value speed over comfort." "Charlie, what's your take on their position at the saloon?" Charlie Baudre, the gang's finest shot and a man of few words, spoke up. "They're posted high. They're watching Maria, and they think they're invisible. They're wrong. We go after Silas and Jed first. Take out the shooters, and the sheriff's muscle dissolves." "No killing unless we have to," Billy insisted, running a hand over the cold, smooth stock of his rifle. His code was about retribution, not senseless slaughter. "We need them alive and talking to get the names of who ordered the hit, and more important, where Father Michael hid the evidence, those ledgers." Doc Scurlock took a piece of chalk and drew a rough layout of the livery stable. "The best route is through the back alley, using the wind to cover the sound of our approach." "All right," Billy commanded, his voice gaining authority. "Duck and Jose, you'll sneak in and cut the tie lines on their horses and any other horses that look like they belong to their posse. We want to stop their quick escape. Charlie and Tom, you're covering the stable's back door and the alley. Keep the heavy fire contained. I'll go through the front. We hit them hard, fast, and silent. Anyone who fights is asking for a lead pill." The plan was audacious, relying on the speed and precision that had made Billy the Kid legendary. The only light was the cold, distant moon, casting long, deceiving shadows over the land. Billy checked the load on his two peacemakers, the familiar metallic click echoing his own focused heartbeat. He knew this was more than just a gunfight. It was about honoring his promise to Maria and the memory of a good man. They thought they bought silence with a bullet. Tonight, we prove them wrong. Let's mount up. We hit the livery before the coyotes stop howling. The gang rode out, their horses moving like silent ghosts away from the firelight, disappearing into the vast, indifferent emptiness of the frontier. The hour was the dead man's watch, that miserable, cold time just before the first light of dawn. The air around the Redemption Wells livery stable was heavy, smelling of manure, wet straw, and the rank sweat of nervous men. Billy slipped through the main door, his boots making almost no sound on the packed dirt floor. He moved like a predator hunting in familiar territory. The only light inside came from a single dirty lantern, burning low in a corner stall. It weakly illuminated Silas, the behemoth, whose massive frame was sprawled on a cot, snoring loudly, his sawed-off shotgun barely visible beneath a dusty blanket. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked with a loud protest behind Billy. A cold sense of danger washed over him, a sixth sense that had saved his life countless times. Before he could turn fully, a flash of movement and a metallic click. Jed, the jumpy, quick one, had been awake, sitting in the shadows, a short-barreled derringer already in his hand. "Hold it right there, kid," Jed squeaked, his voice cracking from fear and too much cheap whiskey. "Don't move or I'll blast you into the next county." Billy froze, his hands instinctively spread wide and away from his guns. A practiced move designed to lull a panicked man into a false sense of control. His eyes, however, never left Jed's face. "Easy, partner," Billy said, his voice calm as a pond at dawn, his tone soothing. "No need for blood on the floor. I just want a conversation. A little business with the man who shot a priest, that's all." Silas woke, cursing in a deep, gravelly voice, realizing the danger too late, and grabbed frantically for his shotgun. The tension in the small, enclosed stable was a living thing, stretched taut to the breaking point. Billy moved with the speed of a striking snake, not fully drawing, but making a feint with his right hand toward his Colt .45. It was a bluff. Jed flinched violently, firing the tiny derringer in a panic, the miniature bullet whistling past Billy's ear and embedding harmlessly in the rough-hewn beam above. In that fraction of a second, the moment of chaos and noise, Charlie Boder's rifle cracked from the stable's back window. It was a clean, perfectly placed shot that clipped the lantern's glass and extinguished the flame, plunging the stable into near-total darkness. Silas, roaring in confusion, finally managed to fire his shotgun, the blast deafening, blowing a massive, useless hole in the ceiling before Tom and Jose burst in, using the shadows as cover and pinning him down under the cold weight of their Winchesters. Silas was subdued with a heavy blow from Tom's rifle stock, bloodied but conscious and spitting curses. Jed, barely conscious from Billy's lightning-fast pistol whip across the jaw, was dragged upright. "Who sent you, you worthless dog?" Billy's voice was stripped of its youthful charm, cold and deadly. "Who ordered the priest's shot, and where did he hide the ledgers?" Silas spat blood and a broken tooth, his courage dissolving into primal fear now that he was disarmed. "Go to hell, kid, you're a dead man. We were just the bait. Claiborne set a trap. At the old Eagle Pass Saloon. He's got the law waiting for you, a whole damn posse." Jed, whimpering with a fractured jaw, confirmed the worst with a groan. "Sheriff Hale. They're using the saloon as a diversion. They're moving the real evidence tonight to Claiborne's ranch. The ledgers are there." Billy's eyes narrowed to slits. Claiborne hadn't just hired killers. He had planned a complete ambush, using the rumor of the ledgers being in town to lure Billy into a deadly outnumbered fight. It was a cowardly but cunning tactic. They expected a duel. "They're going to get a reckoning," Billy muttered, looking at the two terrified men. He knew what had to be done to send a message. He took a heavy rope from a nearby post. With Tom's help, they tied Silas and Jed securely to their own horses, leaving them blindfolded and facing the main road into town. A stark, humiliating message for Hale and Claiborne that the kid had come for his reckoning, and he was taking no prisoners. Billy checked his gun again, the metal cold and reassuring in his palm. No time for the Eagle Pass trap, boys. We disrupt their party, and then we go straight for the big snake at the ranch. The sun was already climbing toward the midday brand when Billy and his gang reached the bluffs overlooking the Eagle Pass Saloon, a desolate, crumbling structure 20 miles from Redemption Wells. As Silas had confessed, a force of Sheriff Hale's men, nearly a dozen strong, were dug in behind barrels and wagons, Winchesters loaded and waiting for a frontal assault. The air was dry and smelled of dust, anticipation, and the metallic tang of gun oil. "They're too many for a direct charge, Billy," Doc Scurlock warned, surveying the enemy's strong defensive positions through a spyglass. "We hit them, and we lose half our men before we even get to the ranch. Claiborne's already won this part of the game." Billy lowered his field glasses, his focus absolute. "Then we don't fight them, Doc. We make them think they're fighting a different war." He pointed to a small, dry ravine running along the saloon's flank. "They're waiting for the shooting to start from the front. They're not watching the back. Charlie, take the highest ridge by those 3 lone pines," Billy commanded, his voice sharp and precise. "Don't aim to hit. Start shooting just over their heads and at the ground between their firing positions. Make them nervous, make them think they're surrounded. Jose, you start a good thick brush fire on the far side of the saloon to give them something to worry about besides us. Smoke's a good liar." Doc and Tom looked ready, their hands gripping their rifles. "Doc and Tom, you're with me. We ride fast and hard, firing wide, making noise, making them believe a small army is upon them." Ubil! The assault was a symphony of orchestrated chaos designed to panic men, not kill them. Charlie's long-range shots whined, kicking up dirt and splinters near the defenders, the sound echoing ominously across the canyon walls. Jose's fire sent thick, black smoke billowing across the canyon floor, blinding the deputies' line of sight and choking their lungs. Billy, Tom, and Doc charged on horseback, firing their revolvers wildly into the air and the ground, yelling like demons, making the enemy believe a small army had descended upon them from the smoke. The deputies, overwhelmed and unable to see the small size of the attacking force, broke formation, scattering into the crossfire and the smoke. The trap had been wasted. Billy didn't linger to pursue the retreating men. "Let the dogs run. The snake is the prize." Leaving the confusion behind, they rode hard, forcing their tired horses toward Claiborne's ranch. The ranch house was a small, 2-story adobe fortress, but the commotion from the Eagle Pass had alerted Claiborne. When Billy and his gang arrived, the stout, cowardly cattle baron and Sheriff Hale were already loading saddlebags onto 2 fresh horses by the stable, the priest's leather-bound ledgers visible in the bags. They were running. "Hale! Claiborne!" Billy shouted, drawing his Colt .45. The sound of his voice cut through the afternoon air in the ranch yard like breaking glass. "The game's over. Drop the guns and the books. The jury is out." Hale, sweating profusely through his official uniform, drew his own heavy 6-shooter, his face a mask of rage and fear. Claiborne, bloated and utterly cowardly, shielded himself behind the sheriff, pulling a small, ineffective derringer. "You can't do this, Bonnie. I am the authority here. You're nothing but a worthless outlaw." Hale fired first. His shot rushed high and wild. Billy returned fire with blinding speed, a classic cross-draw that was faster than the sheriff's aim. The sheriff gasped, clutching his chest as he stumbled backward, his gun clattering to the dirt, the wind knocked out of him. Claiborne screamed and made a pathetic, desperate dive for his horse. "The law you bought, Claiborne," Billy snarled, leveling his gun steadily. The ranch boss froze. He had the wealth and the men, but in that final, desolate moment, facing the cold steel and righteous fury of Billy the Kid, he was exposed as a helpless, frightened mouse. The battle for Redemption Wells was over. The tension slowly bled out of the ranch yard, replaced by the ringing silence that follows a gunfight. Doc Scurlock immediately tended to Sheriff Hale, whose wound, while painful, was not fatal. He had been taught a harsh lesson in where the real power lay in the territory. Claiborne, the Baron, was disarmed and completely broken, his expensive clothes stained with sweat and the dirt of his own greed. "Find the men," Billy ordered Jose and Charlie. "Tie them tight, but treat the wounded. We're not murderers, we're judges." Billy himself retrieved the leather-bound ledgers from the saddlebags, the evidence Father Michael had died protecting. He opened them briefly, scanning the meticulous entries detailing the land grabs and fraudulent taxes. "Proof enough," he muttered, closing the book. The silence of the desert seemed to approve of the action. Later that evening, after the defeated posse had been rounded up by Tom and tied in a neat, humiliating row near the ranch corrals, Billy rode back toward Redemption Wells. He approached the church, the only beacon of light in the quiet town. Maria Chavez was waiting inside, not kneeling but standing tall and resolute, a lamp held in her hand. "Justice, ma'am," Billy said simply, dismounting. He laid the ledgers on the small wooden altar, the lamp's light reflecting off the worn leather. "The books are here. The proof is safe. The sheriff is wounded but alive, and the Baron is tied up at his ranch waiting for someone to find him. Tell the town to send for a federal marshal. Someone from Santa Fe who can't be bought. The local law is broken. You have the truth now." Maria reached out, touching the cover of the book, a look of profound relief and quiet resolve washing over her face. "You risked everything for this, Mr. Bonney. Why? You're an outlaw. You could have just ridden on." Billy shrugged, pulling his hat low over his eyes. The light caught the deep scar on his cheek, a memory of an old betrayal. "There's the law that's written in books, and there's the law written on a man's heart, Mom. Father Michael had the right kind of heart, and I don't care much for bullies wearing a badge." He adjusted the heavy colt on his hip. "Tell the homesteaders that Billy the Kid did this. Tell them the truth always comes out, even if it has to ride on a fast horse." He turned to leave, his spurs jingling softly on the wooden floor. Maria watched him, a figure of contradictions, a killer who had brought salvation. "Will you stay, Mr. Bonney? The town will protect you. You're a hero here now." When she looked up again, Billy the Kid was gone. Only the receding echo of horses' hooves whispered on the trail out of Redemption Wells, quickly swallowed by the immense, indifferent silence of the desert. He returned to the deep scrubland, disappearing into the vast, darkening landscape. Hale and Claiborne would face a federal court, the town would recover its lands, and Maria would teach the children not just reading and writing, but the story of the honest priest and the corrupt sheriff. The name William H. Bonney faded back into the obscurity from which it had sprung, but the legend of the kid, the ghost who brought justice with a gun and vanished into the shadows of the Badlands, would forever ride the night wind of the New Mexico territory. He was the shadow of retribution, a phantom rider, a whisper of a promise kept, existing only in the tales told by firelight, a true legend of the American West.